Hey,
Hello.
Simon.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar.
Simon?
How you
Hey,
doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey,
Hello.
Hey there.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon Brooks and I'm the host of Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts and folk and fairy tales from our elders, a meeting with professional storytellers. As we still continue with COVID-19 and our isolation, a lot of these conversations have recently been done online. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession, gems of wisdom, and sometimes a story or two. I'm glad that you're here. Janice Del Negro is a professional storyteller and professor at the School of Information Studies at Dominican University, where she teaches storytelling, children's and young adults literature, and foundations of library and information science. This was another one of those incredibly rich and lengthy conversations, and this is part 2 of 2. Here you'll hear Janice share stories and processes about her storytelling amongst other topics. This episode runs about 1.5 hours, but it is worth it. Please welcome Janice Del Negro.
But part
That's
of
cool.
the fun of retelling a traditional tale that everybody knows is telling it from a point of view that no one has told it from before. And so that becomes something else to look at. I'm still trying to find a way into Sleeping Beauty, though. I can't. She's boring, Simon. What am I going to do with her?
She is. Yes.
She's asleep for the whole story. Although you could probably make a pretty good running joke about her napping too long. But
Yeah.
you know, I got into this thing about wanting to retell all these big traditional fairy tales in 7 minutes or less.
Oh, wow.
Right? So you could tell them in an oleo. Because part of the problem with it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem for other people, is that oftentimes folktales or fairy tales, they're longer than that.
Yeah.
You know, they can run 15 minutes easily, if even
Oh,
a
yeah.
tight one. So I started with Rumpelstiltskin.
That's a great story.
And I told Rumpelstiltskin. And I was in a workshop with Lauren Nemi. And that's one of the things we did. We did this retelling thing. And there is really something to be said about that concentrated amount of time. You have this much time to come up with the outline for a story, right? You have 45 minutes to do this. And I do this, and it's it's amazing how that focuses the mind. And so I came up with Rumpelstiltskin, and it's pretty much the way that I tell it now is pretty much the way that I wrote it then.
Wow.
I mean, I tinkered with it a little, but not that much. And part of it is that the structure of the story itself is so strong, right? So that it's hard to really screw it up. But I went from Rumpelstiltskin to Rapunzel. And then I told the 12 Dancing Princesses is another one. And I was working on Snow White. And at first I thought it was going to be this sort of dark and moody story about the dark feminine and yada, yada, yada. And as I was working on it, it turned into something totally different. And all of a sudden so now I tell it from the point of view of the stepmother.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And Snow White is a brat. She is such a brat. She's a teenage girl and she's hell on wheels, and she's just, and the whole story is from the stepmother's point of view. And so what I had a lot of fun with was fitting the things into the story that people recognize from Snow White. You know,
Right.
She sends the huntsman off to bring Snow White back.
Yep.
Because her father will be really upset if anything happens to her. Not because she wants him, just go get her and bring her back. And he does, but even the huntsman was not possessed of infinite patience. And finally he says to her, fine, do what you want. Because she stamps her feet and she says, I'm not I will not go back to the castle as long as that woman, she meant me, is still there. And the huntsman runs out of patience and says, fine, stay here and freeze to death. I'm going back before it gets dark and cold. And so he comes back to the palace, but on his way back, he changes his mind. And he turns around to look for the princess, because if anything scared the huntsman, it was me. And if anything happened to Snow White, I, in deference to my husband, would have the huntsman's heart in a box. So I'm pulling these little things out of Snow White that everybody recognizes and using them differently in the story. You know, we don't know that she has hair as black as ebony and lips as red as blood until the prince finds her sleeping in a hammock. She's not in
a coffin.
No, we don't go there. There's just too much, way too much happening there. So that was and I have to say that I laughed through the whole thing. As I was putting the story together, I laughed through the whole story. And I was just like, I don't have like any PTSD from having teenage daughters or anything.
Right.
Except I do. And and a friend of mine also had a teenage daughter at that time. And I was like, I was getting like flashbacks to what it was like raising my own teenagers who,
oh my gosh.
Honestly, I was just, they're 29 and 30 now, and they're just fine. Thank you. But teenagers, it was tough. It was really rough. And I exercised many of those demons in the retelling of the story. So I'm going to tell that, in a week from tomorrow, I think. I really should look that up.
Where are you going to tell it?
Stories with Spirit, Cooper and Anne. Cooper.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We're doing 5 different tellers with 5 different versions of Snow White.
I need to get tickets for that.
Cooper and Anne and me and Laura Packer and Milbury Birch.
Yeah, I got to get tickets for that. That's for sure.
There's 5 different versions of Snow White happening there.
That's going to be so cool.
So that'll be fun. I love that. That makes me really, Oklahoma Winter Tales used to do that all the time. And they had a storytelling festival in the winter, and they used to have whoever their featured tellers were. One of the things they did was tell their version of a particular story. Fran Stallings knows all about it because she was very involved with them. I remember one year, I think it was David Novak, told Cinderella in iambic pentameter. I don't think anybody's really forgiven him for that after all this. It was just, so I think that it's really fun, and it's fun for listeners, and it's fun for tellers. And I don't know if it would work with stories that people didn't know already.
Right. Yeah.
So part of the fun is taking the story that everybody knows and flipping it, right? Is turning it into something else. And so that's while leaving the structure and the trajectory of the plot intact, right? While not changing the ending or altering the action of the story. How much can you change the story,
right,
while staying true to that sort of through line, right, of the traditional tale? So it's really fun.
It is a lot of fun. I like telling Rapunzel these days because all the kids, have you heard the story of Rapunzel? Yeah. So the story of Rapunzel that is it the Disney movie? Yeah. I was like, well, they did to Rapunzel what they also did to the Jungle Book.
Right.
And the Jungle Book was a great movie and I loved it, but it's nothing like the real book. And it's the same with Rapunzel. And I'm going to tell you the real story of Rapunzel. And then I just go at it. And the kids are just, so which did you prefer? And it's amazing how many kids prefer the original version and not the Disney version. Well,
and that's something that works really. I mean, I find that high school students really love that.
Yeah.
Hearing the earliest versions of the tale that we have, and then hearing the retellings. I mean, they really like the variant idea. I was working with a creative writing class once in a high school, and You know what was really funny was I had all the tech stuff, right? I had a smart board and I had all kinds of technology. And as I was introducing them to what we were going to be doing and talking about, I had all this, electric stuff. And but when I wanted them to work together, I broke them into groups and gave them all those big pads. Those
Oh
big
yeah.
pads, and a bunch of magic markers, and they were so happy to be sitting on the floor with these pads on the floor, with these big magic markers, drawing things on the pages and crossing things out and using different colors. And I was like, I need to do this all the time. And
Yeah,
they
because they're
came up
so
with some great stuff. I was asking them, pick a story that everybody knows, and then decide what has to stay. What has to stay in the story so people will actually recognize it for the story that you're telling,
right.
and what can go. And so they were making lists of things. And at one point I had a girl come up to me. She must have been 16 or 17 years old, working with two other girls. And she came up and said, okay, it's the Sleeping Beauty thing, she says. And I'm like, yeah. She says, so she was asleep, right? I said, yes. And she had babies. She had twins in the desert, right? I said, yes. And she says, so there was no consent involved there, right? And I said, depending on how you tell the story, if she was asleep, I would say that is true. Yes. That there was no consent involved there. And she goes, oh, I'm going to tell the hell out of this story. And back she went, and I was like, this is what we call the oral tradition.
Yes.
We're gonna take this story that everybody knows and we're gonna make it work for contemporary listeners. And it was just really, it was really fun to do. I mean, I love them as a group. I find them,
I like high school.
Remarkable.
Yeah, I've been told that I work well with the little kids, the pre-5-year-olds. But I do them. I'm not comfortable doing them, but I love anything from K up to 12. Grade 12. It's just brilliant because they're all so different, and you get different things back from them. They are
different, and they are, and what they remind me, high school students in particular, what they remind me is to not ever take anything because of how it looks.
Yeah,
because teenagers are trying on so many things all the time, and I've seen like these tough guys sitting in the back of the room thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have problems with this. With their cigarettes are rolled up in the sleeve of their t-shirt, and they're like slouched in their chairs in the back with their legs out in front of them, and they've got their dark glasses are on in the classroom. And I'm usually just grateful that they're not being disruptive.
Yeah.
I mean, I am remembering one particular incident here. And then all of a sudden at the end, when we opened it up for questions, that's where I got the questions from. So when you're retelling a story, and I had these incredibly intelligent, remarkable questions about authors being true to their work, and how searching for the right word was really important. And I was just like, and that's one time that I remember really distinctly, because if you were casting the bad boy in a high school movie, it would have been this guy.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, he raised his hand. I thought, okay, be brave. Sure, that's the question. And we had this, and I walked out of there thinking, well, that reminds you yet again to not make assumptions about anything or anybody or any teenager or any person who's in your audience, because you don't know. You don't until you talk to someone. And I think that's part of our difficulty. Nobody's talking to anybody.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I've always, when I go into schools, it's, sometimes teachers will say, watch out for this kid. It's like, because that kid's going to be the best in the group. This is going to be remarkable. And the teacher's going to see something that she's never seen or he's never seen before. That
happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it does.
I went to tell stories at some school in downstate Illinois, and it was the kids who were in summer school. And I got the word from before I even got there that I shouldn't really expect much from this group, right? Because I think it was like grade 3 to 8, and which is hard enough anyway, right?
Yeah, right.
And they didn't do well in school, and they were discipline issues, and I went in there and they had us all crammed into the teacher's lounge because it was the only room with any air conditioning. And it was one of those downstate Illinois 102-degree days.
Oh,
I don't know if you've been in Illinois. Is kind of flat.
yeah. No, I visited Chicago, and I couldn't believe it was my first experience with humidity.
But oh God! But when you go to central Illinois, it's flat and there's nothing but cornfields or soybean fields. So there's no shade. So it's really it's sort of blinding. Of course, I liked it because I'm strange. But anyway, so we're all crammed into this little room because it's the only room with any air conditioning. And I'm thinking, and they're telling me as I'm walking into the room, the teachers are telling me how bad this group is, right? How terrible they are. And we had the best time. I mean, we had a ball. And I have some theories about that. But I remember that we had a wonderful time. The kids were attentive and participatory, and even the older kids were sort of in it. And I was just, and I'm not a bad storyteller, but I mean, really, when you have kids, you can have difficult groups that just don't work.
Mm-hmm.
That happens a lot. So I leave there and I'm getting I can't believe they paid attention. It was just amazing. They did this, and so-and-so back there never does anything. And, I was getting, the stuff we get all the time. So I leave that event and I go to a library in a small town, and it's supposed to be a summer reading program the same day, a summer reading program celebration thing. And all these kids are very, they're economically in better shape than the kids that I was originally with. And my first group, they were kids who were really good in school, who had read over 100 books over the summer, and they were hell on wheels. Those kids. Yeah. I mean, they were really literally a pain in my fanny. And I was just like, oh, because you get groups like this all the time when 10% of your energy has to be spent on controlling the group, as nobody else is doing it. Right. And you're distracted from the telling sometimes. And it's a difficult group. It's not that it didn't go well. It went fine, except that it was much more, it required a whole lot more energy and concentration from me than just telling. Right. Because I had to be the the coordinator of what was happening there. And, I remember leaving and thinking, so here I was in one group where they told me they were going to be awful. They told me ahead of time they were going to be terrible. And they kept telling me that as I was walking into the room. And then I'm with the second group. Oh, they're such wonderful kids. You'll just love them. They'll be fine. And they were awful.
Yeah.
They were terrible. They were impolite. They had no idea how to behave themselves in a group. It was.
Does the word entitled seem to fit that second group?
That's a good word. And I run into that a lot. And I think part of it is that people don't know how to introduce a storyteller.
Right. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Somebody who's going to tell a story, the kids have no idea what to expect, and they're not really given any parameters for their behavior. Right. So, and I was left alone with the second group.
Oh my gosh.
I was left alone with them. There was nobody else in the room but me. So,
when was this?
Oh, where was it?
No, when? What year?
A few years back. It was a few years ago. And, but those things that stand out because they are learning experiences.
Yeah.
We hate those, but they're really good for us in the long run. But it was, so I find that happens a lot. When people aren't quite sure what you're doing and how they should introduce you or explain what you're doing. And so that I keep those little incidents like tucked away, the things that worked and the things that didn't work. And I am very fond of a standing microphone. If I'm performing, if I'm on a stage and I'm performing somewhere, I like a standing mic. And there are reasons for that. There are reasons for that have to do with other times when I didn't have a standing mic and it was a problem. I was telling ghost stories on some Chicago ghost tour, one on a bus.
Oh.
They had this bus that was touring haunted spots in Chicago.
Right.
And they were supposed to be up at the oh God, it's a famous cemetery on Chicago's north side. And they were supposed to be able to drive the bus into the cemetery so that we would have quiet, right, for me to do this really nasty ghost story, and of course they couldn't get in because the cemetery was closed.
Right.
Because it was after dark and nobody
yeah.
bothered to check. So they were parked on Clark Street in Chicago, on the north side of Chicago, which if anyone listening knows Chicago knows is an unbelievably busy street, right? It's a big north-south conduit and there's lots of restaurants and bars. And so the place is like jumping all the time. So here we are on this bus, double parked in the street, right? Cars, honking horns. And what do I have for sound? Because I said to them, I'm going to need sound on this bus. So make sure I had the sightseer mic from the bus driver.
Uh-huh.
To hold the button down so that you can talk. And that's what I had to do this story. And I was just like, oh, and people were smashed. I mean, they were drunk and disorderly. And I was like, yep, no more of these little microphones. I need a standing mic like all the time. Linda Gorham, who is a wonderful teller, really likes headset mics because she moves so much.
I'm the same way.
So much. And I like a standing mic because you can play with it. You can do sound effects with it, and you can actually whisper with a standing microphone, and they will still hear you in the back of the room.
But you can do that with a headset too.
I don't like them as much. I don't feel like I have as much control.
Yeah, you do have a lot more freedom with a handheld microphone. That's for sure.
I like a stool.
Yeah.
I usually sit down when I'm talking.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You have mentioned in the past that you like to excavate stories for emotional truths that resonate with contemporary listeners. Tell me about that.
Well, the excavation part is just like read a lot of them, right? Find a lot of them and look at different versions of the same story and variants cross-culturally and all that stuff, just so you can gather as much information as you can, right, about a particular text or a particular tale.
Do you think a lot of professional storytellers do that?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask them.
Okay.
I'm not commenting on anyone else's process, except the people that I know and that I can compliment positively. That I can comment positively about.
That was a good answer. I was testing you there.
So I know lots of tellers that do.
Yeah.
I know a lot of tellers that do. And so once you have this, you have to look at them, sometimes you'll find a story on the page and it feels like it's only part of it.
Yeah.
And it feels like the whole story isn't there. It's sort of bones of a story. And sometimes if you get other variants, you can find other little pieces that maybe give you a hint. But but no matter what story you're telling, the human motivation, the human response, the emotional response is still the human emotional response, right? So when you're looking at, in folktales, I say this a lot too, everything is alive in them, right? In folktales, everything's alive. I mean, stones will speak to you, fish stick their heads out of the water for a conversation, giants hide their hearts inside trees. There's remarkable things can happen in the world, the parameters of that world. But within that space, the emotional response, the human emotional response is still the human emotional response. So Simon, if you're going for a walk in the woods, which I know that you do periodically, I've seen pictures.
I do.
And you came to some sort of like river, and you were standing at the edge of the river, and some fish poked his head his nose, poked his head out of the water and spoke to you. What would you do?
Well, if it was me as a storyteller, I would crouch down and speak to it back.
You'd crouch down and speak to it, but would you be surprised?
Initially, yeah.
So
but I would totally run with it.
Your initial response, which is what the character in the fairy tale does. They totally run with it, right? They just run with it, and that leads to their success because they're willing to run with it. But first they react to it, right? First they react. Right. The fish talks to you, and you think, "What did I eat? Did I drink that much last night?" You know, I mean, so first you react to the strangeness of the situation, and then you run with it, right? And then you go. And so a lot of that, I find that to be really helpful. And I also find that what's often missing in story is character motivation.
Yes.
And so that's something else I look at a lot.
I dick around with one of the Norwegian stories because there was no motivation.
Right.
And it's the boy who could turn himself into an ant, a falcon, and a lion.
Oh, I love that story.
Yeah.
Is that the Magician's Duel one?
Is that the what, sorry?
Is that the Magician's Duel one or something else? Duel, D-U-E-L.
No, it's not that one. It's the princesses are stolen away by trolls.
Right.
And so the boy has to go and find it. Right. Where the trolls have taken the princesses. And the boy is given this task, and basically in the story he comes across these animals that are fighting over this dead horse. And they ask him to, well, choose one of the, we don't know which bits we should eat when we're fighting. Could you decide for us? And so the boy says, well, yeah, I think the ant should have the brains because it can climb inside all those creepy crawly places.
Right.
And then the falcon gets all yes, right. And the falcon gets all the liver and the kidneys because it can pull those bits out.
Right.
And the lion can have all the muscles and the meat because that's what it's good at. Right. And that's how and I was like, and then they give him the ability to shapeshift, to turn into those creatures. And I'm like, that's really naff. That's really all he's doing is like, well, it's common sense. You should do this, this, and this.
He's solving their problem. But
right. And so what I did, I didn't think that the gift was appropriate to the challenge. Okay. Yeah. Right. And so I changed it. Well, one of the things that I changed was I changed the boy into a girl because I was so fed up of all these ragtag boys ending up rescuing the princess. So I turned it into a girl, and she comes around the corner and she sees this old man being attacked by these three creatures. And so she draws her sword, takes all of her courage that she can muster, and goes and kills them all. And because she does that, the old man gives her the shape-shifting abilities.
And I love those helper figures in stories.
Yeah.
They are really it's also Scandinavian. A story about a king who won't let anybody marry the princess. We'll talk about that. There's a lot of those going around, actually. These fathers who have unnatural affection for their daughters can be quite an interesting path to take through traditional story. That you have to be able to herd rabbits in order to marry the princess.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the three brothers, the two older brothers who are so cocksure that they can do it, go off to the palace to herd rabbits and win the princess. And on the way, they meet the first brother meets this old woman who has her nose caught in a crack in a log. And she wants, which is hilarious to start with, and she wants help. And he says, oh, I can't help you. I'm too busy. I have to go to the palace. And of course he goes and he fails. Right. And then the second brother laughs at the first brother, and he goes to the palace, and he meets the same old woman, and he won't help her either. And so he goes to the palace and he fails. And the third brother, who is the youngest brother and who everybody thinks isn't very bright, packs up his sandwich and off he goes, right? And he runs into this old woman and she says, I've been here for this long and no one has helped me. And so he's like, oh, mother, this is terrible. Let me help you. And so he gets her out of her predicament and she's sitting on the log and she's rubbing her nose and she looks at him, at this young man. And he's, my, aren't you pretty? She says to him. And you've been so good to me. I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you some advice and a gift. And so she does. She gives him advice and she gives him a whistle. And the whistle, the set of pipes, will herd the rabbits. And so he goes off to the palace and he is successful where everyone else has failed, 3 days in a row. And in those 3 days, the way that I tell this story, he meets the princess and they have a little chat. And so when we get to the point where the father is like, well, you can't marry my daughter. And the princess says, you promised. And the father says, you can't marry this boy. She says, you promised. What is the worth of a king's promise? And so she gives in because she wants to marry him.
Yeah.
She wants him at the end. So it's like she's not so much the prize as the one who makes the marriage happen.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's another story that I tell where the princess is a real brat. Right. I mean, she's a real brat in the story that's recorded, right? And I'm like, what? Why would he want to marry her? And he's just like this little snot-nosed kid, right? And so he gets to meet the princess at the end, and they have a conversation, and he decides that he'll just take half the kingdom and not the hand. He says, I'm just a lowly commoner. You need to find a prince for this woman. And because of that, he lived happily ever after.
And because of that, he lived happily. Absolutely. Yes, he does. It's so interesting to me because, and people stop and say, well, you have this romantic fairy tale and everybody lives happily ever after. And there's all this stuff. And how come it's always true love and money? I said, because that's what people want.
Right.
I said, you talk about it like this is something people don't want.
Right.
Everybody wants true love. Everybody wants that passion in their life. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants to have enough.
Didn't you write a book about that?
Did I?
Wasn't it called like Midlife or something like that?
Oh, I put a story. I was on a recording with Dan Ketting. We recorded Daniel Chinnon's story for Midlife, I think was the name of it. I can't even remember now. Isn't that terrible? I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing.
It's 2020. Nothing's terrible. It's just 2020.
And so, I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the emotional truth of the character. Like, why would a character do that? And can you set it up in such a way that the motivation is clear without being, pedantic or over explaining or, making the motivation the story instead of the story being the story? And how do you make the story move? Because if you're trying to tell something, what works on the page doesn't always work in the air, right? So you have to
absolutely
finagle that a little. How do you figure out how that works? I really want to figure out a way into Sleeping Beauty, but so far I haven't found it. But I started retelling East of the Sun and West of the Moon.
Oh, I love that story.
Which I love. And I was in my, fairy tales in 7 minutes mode, and this is going to be an epic. Because I started to do it and I was like, this is just not going to.
There's lots of pieces.
I'm not going to be able to, I could maybe as an exercise compress it, but part of what makes that story work really well, I think, is the evocation of the snow.
Yeah, it's space. The story is about space.
All about the space, right?
Yeah.
Her mother talks her into leaving with this bear. So there's a story there, right? There's a story there about the relationship between the daughter and the mother. Mm-hmm. She gets onto the bear's back with hardly anything, with everything she owns, which is hardly anything. And it's freezing and it's dark and, the snow is falling. And he asks her, "Are you afraid?" And she says, "No." And then he says, "Are you cold?" And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Put your hands and your feet inside my fur." And so she snuggles down into the fur of this great white bear. And she's so warm in this freezing air that she falls asleep on his back, warm. And so the whole relationship between the girl and the bear is the crux of the story.
Yeah.
But it's all about the women when you look at it, right?
Yeah.
The mother and the daughter. It's the girl and the bear. It's the bear and the troll. It's the girl and the three women she meets on her way to assist him. It's the girl and the daughter of the troll queen. And so it's all about it's this incredible journey that she has, and trying to figure out, how do you make something work when Cooper has a great Irish variant on this. That's a really fabulous story. And she writes him a note, right? At night, the heroine writes him a note. "I'm here. Don't go to sleep. Don't drink the stuff, right? Right? She writes him a note, which of course makes perfect sense. So when that doesn't happen in the in the Norwegian version, what can happen to make that make sense? So I'm noodling with that now. I think I figured it out too, but you'll have to wait until I finish it. But it's going to be long. It's at least 20 minutes. I was talking to Megan Wells, and I said I was trying to do this, but it's going to be an epic. And she goes, "You should let it be 45 minutes and just do the one story as a whole show." And I started laughing. I said, "That's what you do."
Yeah, that's true. That's what
I said, "I don't know if I can do that, but I'm going to do the story first, and then I'll figure it out. Then I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it later." The one thing about being online so much now is that you can create your own venue.
Right. But you have to get people to come.
You do, but you can. I mean, that's what's so interesting about it. You really can. I mean, we're averaging about almost 40 people in open mic.
Nice.
And that's just the open mic. I mean, that's not, it's not a big show or a big concert. It's people coming to tell stories. It's very relaxed. It's very casual. I'm trying to channel my inner Liz and get that sort of
Liz Weir does a great job with her. She's so
in the open mic. I mean, I just think it just works so well. But I think the virtual storytelling works much better than I thought that it would.
Mm-hmm.
And although I really appreciate the live ones,
mm-hmm.
I'm not so enamored of the ones that are recorded. I mean, I've seen live shows and watched them recorded after the fact because I couldn't make the live show, which is fine. But I don't understand we're going to record your story and we're going to show that, as opposed to showing the teller actually telling. I kind of, what's the difference between a videotape storyteller? How is that?
So I know that some venue, I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to cause a storm or anything like that, but I know that some of the large festivals sent video cameras to the participants. That way they can guarantee a good quality picture, right?
Right, and they can control all the variables, which I totally get. And I think,
and if someone's not loud enough, they can adjust it there in the editing of it
we may as well tell people it was the National Festival. They did a great job, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought they did an excellent job.
Well, Timpanogos did the same thing. They also,
I don't find that I'm as enamored of watching a taped teller. I don't, and that's just me. A lot of people are doing it and they're just fine with it. That's fine. But there's something about a live telling, even if you're online, that I mean, that's one of the reasons why Megan Wells is, she does a lot of online stuff and big shows, right? Hour-long things. You should see her. Medusa's great. And but she has a Q&A after it.
Right. I think that,
And so there's this live feeling. And when we did Dracula, which feels like light years ago, but was only a few weeks now that I think, she did Dracula live, and then we had a panel afterwards. We had Amy Douglas and Liz Ware and myself and Megan. And we had questions from the audience and from the listeners. And we had this panel discussion going on, and each member of the panel, did 5 minutes on something they were going to talk about. Liz talked about the original folktale that Bram Stoker based Dracula on, and Amy Douglas talked about Samhain traditions, and I talked a little bit about the Gothic hero and Gothic literature, and it was this really lively discussion, right, in this event, and I'm not sure it would have the same energy if it was taped, if it was a recorded story. There was something about being able to interact with the listeners, even through the camera,
right?
That was. It was, and I'm thinking about this a lot, Simon, trying to figure out about this virtual space, right? How do we create community in a virtual space, right? Because I teach graduate school now, I teach grad students, and we are online all the time now. We're doing, and my university is actually doing really well compared to other places that aren't doing so well. And I'm really interested in the virtual space. How do you create community in a virtual space? And if there's a lot of literature that talks about libraries as the third place.
Mm-hmm.
There's work, and there's a third place that's important to you in your life as an individual, right? Homework, and what's your third space? For a lot of people, the third space is their library, right? It's a community space. It has, there's interaction happening there and all that stuff. But now that we're online, now that things are virtual, what happens if your third space is a virtual space? How do you create community in a virtual space? And so there's some stuff. Sorry, I just went off.
No, I think it's a really interesting question because it's, you need to create this place of trust to start with, right, and a place where people feel safe. And I think that, when you go into a library, or you go to, if you choose, I'm just throwing things out there, but like if you go to a bar or a pub or whatever, restaurant, then those places are going to be safe, right? Because you might have been in there before, or the place has got a reputation, and creating that online community is going to be the same thing. You need to create a place where people feel comfortable being. They know it's going to be, it's like Liz Weir's thing, right? I mean, there's nothing more comfortable. I mean, you just want to drag the laptop and put it over the top of a fireplace, and
that is a community space. She is going to create a community space there.
Yeah, so and I think you've done the same with yours. I mean, when I was
trying, we're trying.
Well, I think you're succeeding, to be honest.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I find it really fascinating. The whole thing is really fascinating. So I'm interested, and a lot of people are getting to hear things they've never been able to hear before, and hear tellers they've never been able to hear before, and present work that, I mean, look at Reggie Carpenter's concert series.
Oh my gosh, that is so good.
God, Simon, you were lovely the other night. You were wonderful. When Donna was telling, I was crying. Okay. I was laughing so hard, I was crying. And all I could think of was, there are a few guys on this. I wonder how they're doing. And I was weeping. And it was just so much fun to listen to. I mean, Donna was just hysterical. And Megan's Lysistrata.
Oh my gosh, that was so good.
Was so good. And somebody said, well, you only finished it this afternoon. And I was just like, excuse me, do you have any idea how many years she's been working on this piece?
Yeah.
How much research she's done, how much she knows about this, which is probably light years more than you know. And how long it took her to put that piece together. When she finally got it on the page, that was the last step.
Yeah.
That wasn't the work. The work came before that. Right.
Yeah.
Months and months of work that she'd put in to trying to create this story and situate it properly. And the whole, I mean, you know, when you finally get up to tell the story, you've done months of work before that comes out of
hours and hours and hours and hours. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find something. This hardly ever happens, though, so I don't want to give people the wrong impression. Sometimes you'll find a story and you'll get up and you'll tell it.
Yeah, there's a couple of those that for me, and it's just because it clicks with your psyche, it clicks with your personality, and it happens to be in the right place at the right time, and it just locks itself in your brain, and you got it.
And then you can't do it again. Then you have to go back. Then you have to go back to the work, right? You can only do it that first time. Then you have to go back and do all the work that you skipped. So you never get over it. You're always working on it. But it's like, I don't think people realize, well, why should you get paid? All you're doing is talking.
Oh my gosh.
Right? I mean, and why should you're just telling a story. What's the big deal? So you're not paying for the 45 minutes.
Yeah.
You're paying for the 40 years.
Right.
That Elizabeth Ellis has been honing her craft.
Right.
You're paying for the decades of work that this teller has done on the stories that he tells. You're paying for the months of research that goes into creating a historical piece, right? So you're not paying for the 45 minutes.
No.
You're paying for all the work that went into the 45 minutes.
Right. You're paying for that storyteller's life experience as well, because that's
right,
pulled into the story as well. Right.
Changes everything. Lucy Dove, when I first started telling Lucy, I was, was I even 30? I was never that young. I was a lot younger than I am now. And I mean, a lot younger than I am now. But the older I get, the more that story means to me. Right. The more that means to me, because she's an old woman who's been tossed out of her job because she's old and slow.
Right.
You know, she's not as fast as she used to be. And she has nothing. There's no safety net. Right. She has no safety net. She's going to starve on the street or freeze to death because she doesn't have any money. And so this opportunity to get this sack full of gold for a foolish laird who wants these lucky trousers is an opportunity that she takes. She takes the risk. And she does it true, right? She does it for truth. She doesn't sew the trousers in her cottage and pretend.
Right.
She goes to the graveyard and she sews the bloody trousers in the graveyard, right? She sew them in front of her fire and make believe she sewed them in the graveyard. So she is, I am madly fond of her, I find, in my old age.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fond of her. And so that story has changed a lot over time. And my relationship with that story has changed.
Yeah. I think I was talking to another storyteller and we were talking about, I think it might have been Megan Wells actually, we were talking about stories that we can't tell. Maybe, I don't know who it was. Maybe it was Carmen Didi, I can't remember. I was talking to a storyteller, and what we were saying was that there are some stories that we just can't tell. You know, we love them.
Right.
We just can't tell them. You know, like Beowulf, which is behind me on the shelf up there. I got like, I don't know, 5 different versions of Beowulf. I've got the Beowulf Letters poet book, which Papa Joe gave me, and you know, there's a lot of background information that I've looked into, and I've tried to tell that story, and I haven't been able to. And I think some of it is because our own, you know, going back to this life experience thing, it's like we don't have that life experience where we can our life experience cannot reflect that story back to our audience. You know,
Megan talks about that too.
Yeah, maybe it was Megan I was talking to.
That sometimes your life, you have to come back to a story years later.
Right, yeah.
And suddenly it makes sense to you in a way that didn't make sense to you 20 years ago.
Right.
You know, and you find different layers of it. And that, I think, is really, I think that's true. And sometimes stories you can't tell are stories that you're too emotionally entangled in.
Mm-hmm.
You can't step away from them enough to have the control you need to tell them from the stage. Right. So there's stories like that. I mean, if you're crying when you're telling your story, you need to sit down. Sorry.
No, I agree.
It's just, I mean, you need to have a certain level of control so that your audience feels safe with you.
Right. And if you're crying on the stage, they just want to get up and pat you on the back and say, you're okay.
You have them taking care of you. That's not their job.
Right.
And
It's our
so
job to take care of
it's
them.
our job, really. It is.
Mhm.
And so that, I think, is really true, that sometimes you just can't get the emotional distance you need until some time has gone by, right? And then you can figure it out.
Mhm.
I think that it took me a really long time when I'm very fond of the big, lush, romantic fairy tale. I really like them a lot. I like the language. I like the whole setup. I'm very fond of them. And telling them now is very different than telling them when I was 30 years old.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm 65 years old, so telling them now is really different than the way that I told them then. And I discovered that if I was telling a story, I tell this Spanish fairy tale called The Three Golden Oranges, which is a ridiculously romantic quest story. And I find that I have to be a little bit in love with the hero, right? I have to be a little bit in love with the character if I'm going to tell it, because he has to be worth the effort,
Right.
you know?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so that's part of it, right? That's part of how it works. So I'm always interested in what the next story is. I'm working on East of the Sun and West of the Moon now, and I don't know when I'm going to tell it, if I'm ever going to tell it, but I'm still working on it. And it seems to be the right story to work on right about now, because it's dark and it's getting colder, and it
Yes.
seems to be the perfect story for right this moment. And
Maybe I'll start working on it too.
well, then we could have two different versions. That would be fun.
We could. Yeah.
That'd be
Let's
fun.
do that. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
All right. And I'll get on that.
I'm working too. That'll motivate me to do it, because, oh God, like I said, I can't decide about time these days, because either it's going by really fast, because I've been inside my house since March.
Yeah. No, you used to tell me that. Yeah.
It's almost a year. I mean, I've been out a couple of times, but not very much. And so I mean, I've been in, and it's practically a year now, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's December tomorrow, and
Right.
March is just a couple of months from then. So, and that seems to have gone by really fast.
Yeah.
And yet every day seems not so fast. I just, I think, oh, I'll answer that email in a minute. And then, a week and a half later, I'm like, oh, I never answered that email.
I know.
And
then you forget I've found that because I use Gmail, so it only shows 50 emails and then they go to the next page. And that has been frightening for me, because it's like, I should go back and have a look, because all of a sudden I got 300 emails. That's a lot of pages. Yes. So let's go back and have it. Oh, geez, did I respond to this person? And you're going through the sent emails. It's like,
did I do this or didn't I do this? I'm sure I answered it. No, you only thought you did.
Right. So you thought
it was in your head, but you never wrote it down and sent it.
I know. And so I've been phoning up a lot of people saying, did we talk about this? I'm really sorry.
I know.
It's 2020, but did we talk about this?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I talked to Megan. I was like, remind me, do I care about this? She says, no. I said, okay, good. I'm just not going to think about it now. So but we do a lot of work. I mean, I found that it took me a while, really, it's only lately, to get to the point where I felt like I could actually create something. Could work on a new story or work on a story.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I was just the enormous amount of invisible stress that everyone is under.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this incredible stress everyone is under, and the anxiety that induces, and how your energy is diverted into dealing with the stress and the anxiety, as opposed to dealing with, making dinner. I think everybody needs to just be really gentle with themselves and take it easy. Take it easy, and don't just try not to freak out.
It's true.
Food.
Yeah.
I make gravy, tomato sauce for spaghetti sauce.
Uh-huh.
I make it's gravy, East Coast Italians, anyway. It takes 3 days to cook.
Wow.
It takes 3 days to cook. And so you put it on with everything in it, and you let it simmers for 3 days. And by the time it's finished, it has probably reduced at least a third in the pot, and it's the color of a brick.
Ooh.
Right? It's this really deep red brick color. And it is remarkably concentrated in terms of flavor. But in the meantime, for 3 days, your whole house smells like this. And I remember that smell from when I was a girl, from when I was little. And I remember what that smell meant. It meant company. It meant family coming over for dinner. It meant a house full of cousins and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters, and just in the same space talking, and kids laying around and reading on the floor, or watching, oh God, Hallmark movies. Oh my God. See, that's what I do. I go to my sister's for a week at Thanksgiving, and I go early, right? So I'm there the Sunday before Thanksgiving.
Uh-huh.
I'm there until the following Sunday. And people say, well, what are you going to do at your sister's for a week? I'm like, I'm going to watch Hallmark movies and drink Prosecco for a week before anything starts. That's what we're doing. We're going to drink Prosecco and watch Hallmark movies for a week. And they say, you can't do that. And I said, oh, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you can. And in the meantime, we're cooking and we're prepping stuff for dinner, and we're talking and we're chatting, and we go out because she lives in a really beautiful spot in Western New York. It's very pretty there. And
Whereabouts?
In Goshen, New York, which is north of West Point.
Okay. All right.
So it's actually very close to Pennsylvania. We're actually an hour from Pennsylvania, and less than. And it's beautiful there, and that smell of that simmering sauce is all of that, is all of those things. And we don't even eat spaghetti at Thanksgiving. So that's not part of it. Turkey soup, we're big on turkey soup and clam chowder. And so that smell really, so everybody has that, right? Everybody has some kind of recipe that reminds them of those things. And I find that really comforting.
Yeah.
Right. And for 3 days, my house can smell like that for 3 days. Right. So I have that comfort for 3 days,
That's nice.
Nice. I highly recommend it. Somebody told me they were using spaghetti sauce out of a jar, and I was just horrified. I was like, really? Seriously? It's so easy. All you have to do is be patient. As with so many things in life.
The best things require patience. Yeah.
Patient. So, and you'll wind up with something astonishing when you're done.
I've been told by those who know your work better than I do that your stories balance romance with justice. I also know that your work, I know that your work doesn't pull punches, which I really like. You enjoy the dark, bloody meat of those dark stories, and you don't back away from that. And you also hint at the subtleties of justice through your stories.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit, if you will.
Well,
please. Thank you.
Stories are the advantage of writing your own story, or recreating or reimagining a traditional story, is that you get to make it turns out the way that you want. Right? You get it to turn out the way that you want it to turn out. I had one thing that kicked off my East of the Sun and West of the Moon variant was somebody was discussing the bear comes into the room at night and takes off his skin and climbs into bed with her, right? And so someone was discussing how that was it was a rape scene. And I was like, I just turned around and I said, only if you tell it that way.
Right.
Only if that's the way you tell it. So the trick with the retelling is that you get to shift that motivation and present that scene in a completely different way. So I did it. Yeah. So I have a totally different scene there. So anyway, also the metaphor is a powerful thing, and it is the way that you can deal with extraordinarily raw and difficult emotions and still keep them contained and safe for whoever is listening to you. Is that you can use metaphor or analogy to say what you mean. This is what this is like. This is how this emotion feels, right? So I think that language is very powerful, and that storytellers work with words, and that they need to choose the best word.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
best words to explain what they mean. I think that I think people yearn for justice because they feel that they don't see it in the world as much as they would like to.
Everybody feels
As
that
much as
way.
they should. Everyone feels
Yeah.
that way. And I think that there are terrors in the world that deserve retribution. And sometimes we don't get them. And I am a big believer in karmic justice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But when I'm retelling a story or I'm working on a story, the justice can be in the story. I don't have to wait for karma to bring the justice, because I can bring it. I can bring it to the tale. I tell a story about a sister, an older sister, who discovers the murderer of her younger sister and how she brings him to a sticky but justifiable end.
Ooh.
And she uses the same tools that he used to seduce the sister to bring him to his end.
Nice.
It's pretty elegant, actually. But it started out because there's a ballad called The Elfin Knight. It's a child ballad, and it's about a serial killer, and there's a lot of those in traditional story.
There are.
Some things are never new. There's nothing new. And but there was a line in the story, in the ballad, that was so fabulous that I read this line and thought, I have to build an entire story just so my main character can say this line at the end of the story.
No way.
The villain of the tale seduces young women and into runaway marriages, and he steals their jewels and he murders them. He throws them off a cliff into the ocean and they drown.
So it's a Bluebeard, Mr. Fox type story.
Yes. And so my heroine, after discovering this man who has never been discovered because he's such a good liar, realizes what he's done, knows that no one will believe her, and so constructs the plan to avenge her sister and all of the women that this man has murdered. 7 in all. And at the end of the story, he winds up in the water, and in the same place where he drowned all these women. And as he's trying to keep his head above the water, 7 pairs of pale white arms came up out of the sea and took him. And there, said Giovanna, 7 brides have you sent to the bottom of the sea, and now you will be bridegroom to them all. And that's the line.
Oh,
it is such a beautiful line.
Yes.
And and the story is based on the ballad, but not exact. I mean, there aren't sisters, but there was no way he was getting away with that in the story I was telling.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no way. So it was a question of how to put that together. And that story depends very heavily on the language that's used to present it.
And you're very much into language, because I know that you work with Rachel Ann Harding.
Yeah.
And she's told me, because she's worked some of the stories with me just to run through them. And I'm like, is that a Janice bit right there?
I try not to do that too much. She comes up with her own stuff,
She does,
really
but
can.
there are some phrases that you obviously suggest which are just so delicious that she can't say no to.
She has the best version of Aaron Kelly's Bones I have ever heard.
She does.
It is the
I love it.
best version of we were working on that story, and when she finished it, I said, Rachel, that is the best.
Yeah.
It's the best version I've ever heard. It's the best.
So I was talking with Papa Joe about that story because I wanted a story about a Bowron, and so I was going to do it as a story of as a Bowron player, and then I heard Rachel doing it during COVID, and I was like, "There's no point in me. This is just too good."
But you can. It's just you have to find your way in, right? You have to find your way in.
Yeah. I can, but right now I don't. Now I don't need to.
I wouldn't go near it. I look at that story. I'm like, why? Why would I do anything? Because look, there it is.
Right.
Just sort of,
Exactly.
oh, it's really
It's so good.
And she brought that story was whole when she brought it to me. I mean, we tinkered with it some, and we worked on the pacing and that kind of thing. But that story was whole when she brought it. It was nice, and some of it is just like, okay, so. What does this look like? We talk about a tree in a story, right? And here the trees were all on the trees of blah, 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 right? Blossoms on the trees. Like, okay, so did you look up the tree? Well, no, I didn't look up the tree. I said, well, look up the tree, because if you look up the tree, you know what it looks like. You have the image in your head. And if you have the image in your head, it'll come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Right? If you actually know what you're looking at. Carol Birch has a great book on this, on trying to, on creating the whole story. Right? Even if it's not in the words that come out of your mouth, what you know about the story will still influence the way in which you tell it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So knowing the color of the tree, for example, right? Knowing the color of the blossom. If you know the blossoms of the tree are gold instead of pink,
right,
that changes the image, right? And it changes the way you describe the image. So you look at it. There was food on the table. What kind? What kind of food was on the table?
Where does the story come from? What kind of food did they eat? Yeah.
What kind of food is there, right? How will you describe it? We have in the 12 Dancing Princesses, I have them, they're walking through the woods and the leaves are gold and silver. And when the wind blows through the leaves, they chime, right? So now we have another image in the story, right? Now you can hear them.
Yeah.
Instead of just see them. So it's all about, the devil's in the details, right? It's all about the details. How do you get the listener to see what you see? And one of the ways to do that is certainly language, but another way is to make sure the image is very clear in your own head.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that totally.
So that you can, I remember Carol years and years ago talking about knowing the landscape around your story, that it's not just a question of knowing the path through the story, it's knowing the landscape around the story. So if you fall off the path, if you go off the path by mistake, you still know where you are. Right. So you can still find your way back to the end of the story. Yeah. I mean, it becomes really, it's like those cartoons of children imagining things, and you see these big thought bubbles that are full of dragons and superheroes and a sailboat on the ocean, and are in these big thought bubbles. And that's what stories are like, right? You start out with a little idea, and then all of a sudden you get this thought bubble that just ripples out till it fills the room. All those images fill the space, and you want to fill that space. You want to give your listeners something to take away with them when they go.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
That they saw or phrase that they heard or emotion that they felt that they can take away from the story when you're done. It's part of the process, and everybody processes differently. I mean, everybody has a different process. Right?
What's yours? How do you process through your story? When you find a story that you want to tell, what's the process that you go through?
I'm usually, something catches my attention.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I read a lot of stories, and something will catch, and sometimes I'll work on something right then, and sometimes I'll come back later and say, oh, why didn't I tell that story? Well, it apparently wasn't ready to tell it then, but I want to tell it now. Mm-hmm. But I had Okay, here's an example. So I found this Icelandic folktale.
They're cheery.
It was about three brothers, and somehow they never explain in the story. Each brother has a wish, and the two older brothers wish that their pockets will never be empty of gold, right? And so it is. And the third brother, the youngest brother, he wishes that every woman who sees him will love him. We can just imagine how problematic this is actually going to be in the terms of the story. And that's the opening premise. And then it's a quest tale, right? The princess is locked in her room. Whoever can get her out of the room can marry the princess, that kind of deal. And the three brothers set off. The two older brothers surely the gold, pockets full of gold, are enough to talk a princess out of her room. Of course it's not, but off they go to the palace. And on the way, they take the youngest brother with them. And on the way, he meets these women, the youngest brother. And in the source that I found, in the source story, he has sexual relations with all these women. They're all married women. They're all committing adultery, and their husbands all beat them. And I'm reading the story and I go, well, hell, I'm not going to tell this story. And I couldn't shake the three brothers once had three wishes. And I thought, okay, so how do I subvert this story so that I can actually tell it? Right? Because there are a lot of stories about men beating their wives. There are a lot of traditional stories that have that as a trope.
Right.
And there are some stories that need to die a natural death, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some stories need to die a natural death, period. That's all. We could have a really long discussion about that. But some stories need to be subverted and upended and retold and reframed. So now my hero, who is Jack, the youngest brother, who I named Jack because I could, now he goes away with his brothers. They go on their way to the palace. And the first woman he meets is the innkeeper. And she sees him as he jumps back off the carriage, and he's stripping off his shirt as he walks to the water pump to wash because he's dusty and sweaty from the road. And she's watching him walk across the yard, and she recognizes this sort of sweet swagger that he has, and he reminds her of her son, who was long gone away to war.
Oh.
And so the relationship between Jack and the innkeeper is one of mother and son, right? She loves him like a son.
Yeah.
And then the second woman he meets is the choir mistress in a town, and she loves him like a brother. And the third woman he meets is the fisherwoman who is fishing in the river. She doesn't have a son or a brother. So, and her feelings about Jack were neither sisterly nor maternal. And so we have our little payoff there, because you have to have it. You have to have the payoff, but no woman is victimized in this story. And Jack is not a player, right? He can't be a player, because if he's a player, then you can't root for him.
Right.
But he has to be the hero of the tale. And in order to be the hero of the tale, he has to be on some level an innocent. Right. And so eventually, when the fisherwoman is just like, he stays with her for a week, right? And at the end of the week, she says, now, Jack, it's been a real pleasure, but I have things to do and you need to, move along. So she sends him off. And he goes to the palace after meeting these three women, all of which teach him something.
Nice.
And ultimately, he is the one who talks the princess out of her room, but it doesn't happen in a minute, right? He comes up to the palace and he's looking for his brothers, and the princess's nurse sees him and she doesn't know why, but she feels like he needs a little advice. So she hustles him down to the kitchen, where she introduces him to the cook, who keeps giving him things to eat because, he's such a nice boy. And it's just, so there's this whole dynamic established between Jack and all the women in this tale. Even the queen, right? She comes down and she sees Jack, and she's like, she knows that he's not a prince and he's not a lord and he's not a royal suitor. But something in her says that he can save her daughter, and that makes her love him. And so she agrees that he needs to spend the night outside the princess's door. So every night for weeks, Jack goes up to the princess's door and he sits on the floor and she sits on the other side of the door. And they talk through the door. And he tells her stories of his travels and she tells him stories that she knows. And they sing songs and she sings him a song. He sings her a song that the choir mistress taught him, and she sings him a song. And so the days go by and the weeks go by and the two of them are talking every night until the night finally comes when Jack is on one side of the door with his hand on the door wishing, and the princess is on the other side of the door with her hand on the door wishing. The king finds out, right? And he's pissed. And he comes barreling up to where Jack is just finishing telling the princess the story of three brothers who have three wishes. And she's laughing at the youngest brother who wished that every woman who saw him would love him, because she can see how that would be a problematic wish. And she said, when the king shows up in the hallway and he's ready to, off with his head. I said, anybody who couldn't get her out of her room, head on a pike staff, and the queen and the nurse get between Jack and the king, and the princess is pounding on her door saying, don't you touch him, you leave him alone. And the king is like, no, you can't, don't try to suck up to me now. And he, and then you hear the princess say, I'm coming out. And the sound of the lock turning cracks in the hall. And Jack is like, don't come out. You can't come out. And he says, please don't come out. That boy who made that wish, that stupid wish, I don't want you to love me because of a wish. And she opens the door and he covers his face with his hands. And she comes out and she pulls his hands away from his face and he closes his eyes. And she leans up and she says to him, so only he can hear her. She says, Jack, I loved you before I saw you. The wish is broken. Curse the wish. It's broken and everything will be well. And it was. And that's where we get to the end of the story. And that is a completely different story than the story that I read. And yet the same things happen in the story I tell that happened in the story I read. Three brothers, three wishes, a journey quest story, a princess locked in her room, the two older brothers failing, the youngest brother winning. It's the same things happen in the story, but they are completely different from one another.
I like your story.
It's so much fun to tell.
Well, I enjoyed it the way you told it just then. I can't even imagine what it must be like when you do the full version as opposed to
about 18 minutes long.
Yeah.
About 18 minutes long. But it's but that's a totally different story than the story that I read. So sometimes I do that. I'll look at something and go, oh, what are we going to do here now? And some stories don't need a whole lot of work. Mm-hmm. Some stories just, as you said earlier, they just speak to you. And so they become, instead of working on something for a long time until it becomes part of your bones, it just kind of sneaks right in there.
Yeah.
Every now and then you're lucky and you run across a story like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen all the time.
It does not. It happens very few times.
Most of them take work.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have a goal, right? I mean, tell a fairy tale in 7 minutes or less. I mean, that was a real thing for me. That really, and I'm still thinking about it. I still look at stories sometimes and wonder, where will I fit it? Snow White is about maybe 10 minutes, my version of Snow White.
And that's a short version, because that's at least a 15-minute story.
And that's sort of, and because it's told in the first person from the point of view of the stepmother, it has a different feel to it, right? It has a different emotional feel. I mean, It starts out with, I once trapped a demon under a jar, but that was nothing compared to that brat of a stepdaughter. Right. So that's the beginning of the tale. And her voice is like, I'm telling you, she was talking to me, Simon, when I was putting that story together. I mean, I really started out with this like dark feminine thing and this whole deep, and it turned into something. This woman she took over as the narrator of the tale.
Wow.
She took over. I started writing it in the third person, and I was doing the rewrite, and I was like, oh man, this is just not working. What is the deal here? I can't make this happen. And all of a sudden that voice, it was like it tapped me on the shoulder and said, I once trapped a demon under a jar. I was like, oh shit. I can't say that on the podcast. I was just like, look at that. And she just, it just came out. Her voice told that story.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, okay, here we are. I got it. And I went back, I tinkered with some things and I made sure that I had the flow and the language the way I wanted it. And I wanted to make sure I kept those pieces that you remember, the heart in the box, the hair as black as ebony and lips as red as blood. The prince looks down at her and she's sleeping in the hammock. Luckily she was not drooling and she did not snore. She really did have lips as red as blood and hair as dark as ebony, right? So we get that part. The whole three things, right? How does it start in the traditional story? She gets ribbons and stays and she can't breathe because she ties the ribbons too tight. Right. And then she gives her a comb.
Yeah.
And the apple, right? And so in my version, it's all about her, Snow White, buying into the idea that you have to suffer to be beautiful. And so she ties her ribbon so tight she can't breathe and digs combs into her hair till her scalp is bloody and doesn't eat. She even has problems with fruit. So and that's the part where she says, look at this apple. It's completely rotten. She's trying to poison me. And the stepmother is just like, really? If I was trying to poison her, right? It's like, if I was trying to poison her, she would be poisoned. We would not be having this conversation. So it's this whole, sometimes the story just goes where it wants.
Yeah.
It doesn't go where you want it to. And you have to let it.
Yeah. You have to run with it.
You have to run with it. It's
Yeah.
the only way around it. So that's the, the end where she's supposed to dance in red hot iron shoes.
Yes.
Right. So in the end of my story, she goes to the wedding and she dances so much her feet are on fire. And on the way home, she takes off her shoes and she hangs her feet out the window of the carriage
Nice.
on her way home. So it's just sort of, we want to keep those moments in the story that people will recognize.
Yeah.
The heart in the box, the hair, and yet present them in such a way that they are seen differently.
Yeah. So that she can stick her feet out of the window of the carriage and listen to Free Falling on the radio.
And doze on the shoulder, her royal husband's shoulder, all the way home to a palace empty of drama. Right? So it's really...
That's brilliant.
I'm telling you, PTSD from raising teenage daughters, I swear to God.
I've only got one, and she's excellent.
I love mine. I do. I love and adore them. I do. More than anything in my life, really.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any idea we were going to talk this long?
I did not know.
Really?
But Janice, it's been absolutely fabulous spending this time with you. I know that I didn't get through half of the questions that I could have asked you. Well, Janice, thanks so much.
It was lovely
for doing this. I really appreciate you spending.
I did get tickets for the show we talked about, and her telling was every bit as good as it sounded and more. If you liked what Janice said and want to hear more of her work, contact her at storytelling.org/Del Negro. That's DELNEGRO. That's storytelling.org/Del Negro. Janice is also working on a series telling stories with Megan Wells. It's called Moonshine Stories and are told on the full moon. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to check out other episodes. And if you think I should interview a certain folk and fairy tale, myths and legends storyteller, send me an email. You can find me and my work on Facebook and on my website, Simon Brooks Storyteller. On Instagram, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree? Yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. A shout out to Chris Jedd for creating and recording and letting me use the wonderful music for my podcast. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. Check those guys out, they're fun. You can help me
and help keep my podcast alive and support my craft by becoming one of my Patreons and paying anything from $1 for an episode you enjoyed to a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras, early release, and exclusive content on my work. Patreon.com/Simon Brooks. Thanks to all of you for supporting my little podcast. It is greatly appreciated. Want your name mentioned here? Join my little tribe. If you can't join these wonderful folks, then please help me out by doing something you can do. I would be very grateful if you would leave a review on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, wherever you find this episode. It won't take long, and it helps, not just me, but others to find and enjoy this podcast. Thanks again for being here with me. I know there are lots of other places you could be, and I appreciate it. Until next time, be happy, be healthy, and share the stories you love. Cheers. Simon out.
It's just a story. Just a story.